So we are reading I Am Grimalkin by Joseph Delaney. Right. Chapter 1. A large green bitter apple. Look closely at the enemy before you. Do you see his bulging eyes and berserker fury? Do you see his hairy chest? Can you smell his unwashed body? Keep calm. Why be afraid? You can win. After all, he is just a man. Learn to believe me. I am Grimalkin. Once I reached the center of the wood, I swung a heavy leather sack down from my shoulder and placed it on the ground before me. Then I knelt and undid the cord that sealed it, to be met with the rank stink of what lay within. I grimaced and drew forth what it contained, holding it up to me by its hair, which was greased and matted with dirt. It was very dark beneath the trees, and the moon would not rise for another hour, but my witchy eyes could see clearly despite the gloom, and I gazed upon the severed head of the fiend, the devil himself. It was a terrible sight to behold. I had stitched the eyelids shut so that he could not see anything. I had stuffed his mouth with a large green bitter apple wrapped in a tangle of rose thorns so he could not speak. My enemy had been well looked after, dealt with exactly as he deserved. Notwithstanding the stench, neither the head nor the apple had rotted. The first was due to his power, the second a result of my magic. I spread the sack out on the ground and lowered the head onto it. Then I sat cross-legged opposite it, scrutinizing my enemy carefully. Somehow it looked smaller now than it had appeared when freshly severed, but was still about twice the size of an average human head. Was it shrinking as a result of being separated from its body? I wondered. The horns that protruded from its forehead were coiled and curved like those of a ram. The nose resembled an eagle's beak. It was a cruel face, and deserved the cruelty that I had inflicted upon it in turn. All about my body, a series of leather straps bore scabbards that held my weapons and tools. From the smallest of these I withdrew a thin, sharp hook with a long handle. I thrust it into the fiend's open mouth, pushed it deep into the green apple, and twisted and tugged. For a second there was resistance, but then I pulled the fruit out, bringing it with a tangle of rose thorns. Relieved of the obstruction, the mouth slowly closed. I could see the broken teeth within. I had smashed them with a hammer, as the spook, Tom Ward, and I had bound the fiend. The memory of it was vivid, and I watched it again in my mind's eye. Long had I waited for the opportunity to bind or destroy the fiend, my greatest enemy. Even as a child, I disliked him intensely. I observed the subtle ways in which he increasingly controlled my clan, saw how the coven fawned over him. They spent most of each year looking forward to the Halloween Sabbath, the time where he was most likely to visit. Sometimes he appeared right in the center of their fire, and they reached forward, desperate to touch his hairy hide, oblivious to the flames that seared their bare arms. My growing revulsion was something instinctive to me, a natural-born hatred, and I knew that unless I acted he would become a blight upon my life, a dark shadow over everything I did. He was clever, subtle, and devious, often achieving his aims slowly. Above all, I feared that one day, like many other witches who had once opposed him, I would finally become enthralled to him. That I could not bear, and I needed to do something to make it impossible. And I knew exactly what I had to do. There is one certain way in which a witch can ensure that he keeps his distance. It is very extreme, but it means that she can therefore be free of him forevermore. She needs to sleep with him, just once, then bear his child. Thereafter, having inspected his offspring, he may not approach her again, not unless she wishes it. Most of the fiend's children prove to be abhumans, misshapen creatures of the dark with terrible strength. Others are very powerful witches, but a very few are born perfectly human children, untainted by evil. I knew I risked giving birth to a dark entity, but it seemed worth it to be rid of the fiend. I was fortunate indeed. Mine was a beautiful, fragile baby boy, perfect in every way. I had never felt such intense love for another creature. To have my son's soft warmth against my body, so trusting, so very dependent, was wonderful. Blissful beyond anything I had dreamed of, something I had never imagined or anticipated. That little child loved me, and I loved him in return. He depended on me for his life, and for the first time, I was truly happy. But in this world, such happiness rarely lasts. I remember well the night mine ended. The sun had just set, and it was a warm summer's evening, so I walked out into the walled garden at the rear of my cottage, cradling my child, humming softly to lull him to sleep. Suddenly, lightning flashed overhead, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, the air become sharp with cold. Although I had anticipated a visit from the fiend for some time, I suddenly realized his arrival was now imminent, and my heart lurched with fear. At the same time, I was glad, because once he'd seen his son, I knew he would leave and never be able to visit me again. I would be rid of him for the rest of my life. Previously, the fiend had always appeared to me as a handsome, young man with dark curly hair, blue eyes, and a mouth often upturned at the corners with a warm, welcoming smile. But he can take on many shapes, and this time he appeared in the form that the Pendle witches refer to as his handsome majesty. It is a shape that is used to intimidate and terrify. He materialized very near where I was standing, his fetid breath so close to my face that I struggled not to retch. He was large, 3 times my height, with the curved horns of a ram and a huge, naked body covered in matted black hair. No sooner he appeared than, with a roar of rage, he snatched my innocent baby boy and lifted him high, ready to dash him to the ground. Please, I begged, don't hurt him. I'll do anything, but please let him live. Take my life instead. The fiend never even glanced at me. He was filled with wrath and cruelty. He smashed my child's fragile head against a rock. Then he vanished. For a long time I was insane with grief. And then, as the long days passed and the sleepless nights slowly passed, thoughts of revenge began to swell within my head. Was it possible? I asked myself. Could I destroy the fiend? Impossible or not, that began my goal and my only reason for living. I achieved part of that goal just 1 month ago. The fiend is not destroyed, but at least he is temporarily bound. That binding was accomplished with the help of the old spook, John Gregory, and his young apprentice, Thomas Ward. We transfixed the fiend with silver spears, then nailed his hands and feet to the bedrock of a deep pit in Kenmare in the southwest of Ireland, where his body is now buried. I still delight in the moment of our victory. The fiend was standing on all fours, tossing his head about like an enraged bull and roaring with pain. I stabbed the first nail into his left hand, then struck the broad head hammer 3 times, driving it right through the flesh to pin his huge, hairy paw fast to the rock. However, in my eagerness to bind him, I became careless, and then was the moment I almost died. He twisted his head, opened his mouth wide, and lunged towards me as if to bite my head from my body. But I avoided those deadly jaws, and swung the hammer back hard into his face, smashing his front teeth into fragments and leaving only broken, bloody stumps. Few things have given me greater satisfaction. After that, Tom Ward wielded the destiny blade given to him by the Cuchulainn, the greatest of Ireland's dead heroes. With 2 deadly blows, the spook's apprentice cut through the fiend's neck, and I carried the severed head away with me. While body and head are apart, the devil is bound. But his dark servants pursue me. They want me to return the head to his body and pluck out the nails and silver spears so that he is free once more. To thwart them, I keep moving. By doing this, I buy time so the spook and his apprentice can discover the means by which the fiend may finally be destroyed or return to the dark. But I cannot run forever, and my strength is finite. Besides, it is in my nature to fight, not to run. This is a conflict I cannot win. There are too many of them, too many powerful denizens of the dark for even the witch assassin of the Grimalkin clan to overcome. It feels good to have you in my power, I told the fiend as I sat in front of him. For a moment, the severed head did not reply, but then the mouth slowly opened, and a dribble of blood-flecked saliva dribbled down his chin. "Unstitch my eyes," he bellowed, his voice a deep growl. His lips moved, but the words seemed to rise up from the ground beneath my head, from beneath the head. "Why should I do that?" I demanded. "If you could see, tell your servants where I am. Besides, it is my pleasure to watch you suffer."
You can never win, witch, he snarled, showing his broken teeth again. I am immortal. I can outlast even time itself. One day you will die, and I will be waiting. What you have done to me I will repay 1,000 times over. You cannot begin to imagine the torment that awaits you. Listen, fool, I told him. Listen well. I don't dwell on past failings, nor do I project my mind into the future more than is necessary. I am a creature of the now, and I live in the present. And you are here in the present, trapped with me. It is you who suffers now. You are in my power. You are strong, witch, the fiend said quietly, but something stronger and more deadly stalks you. Your days are numbered. Suddenly, everything grew quiet and still. Our reference to time had spurred him again to attempt what he had previously tried, and failed to do on that occasion that I had lifted him out of the sack. He had the ability to slow or halt time, though being separated from his body had limited his usual powers. However, taking no chances, I rammed the thorn-wrapped apple back into his mouth, then twisted my hooked implement out and pulled it free. The fiend's face twitched, and beneath the stitched lids I could see the orbs of his eyes rolling in spasm. But I could hear the breeze whistling through the leaves above my head once more. Time was moving forward. The moment of danger was past. I returned the head to the leather sack, stared into the leafy darkness, and concentrated. One quick sniff told me this was still a safe place. Nothing dangerous lurked in this corpse that shrouded the summit of a hill. It was an excellent location. My enemies could not approach undetected. My pursuers had been gradually increasing in number, but I had lost them late in the evening, and soon after had employed some of my precious remaining magic to cloak myself. I had to use it sparingly, because my resources were almost exhausted. Now it was nearly midnight, and I intended to rest and regain my strength by sleeping until dawn. Some time later, I woke suddenly, sensing danger. My pursuers were climbing the hill towards me, and they had spread out to encircle the woods. How could that have happened? I had cloaked myself well. They should have not been able to find me. I sprang to my feet and swung the leather sack onto my shoulders. I had been running for too long. Now it was finally time to fight. The thought lifted my spirits. The anticipation of combat always did that. It was what I lived for, to test my strength against my enemies, to fight and kill. How many were there? I fingered the thumb bones that hung from the necklace I wore around my neck, drawing forth their magical powers before probing into the darkness with my mind. There were 9 creatures approaching. I sniffed 3 times to gather more information. There were others further back, almost a mile away, maybe 20 or more moving in this direction. Something puzzled me again, and I sniffed. There was a new addition to this larger group, someone or something with them that I couldn't identify. Something strange. What was it? Something stronger and more deadly stalks you. That was what the fiend had said. Was this what he was referring to? Perhaps it was, but for now the whole larger group could be forgotten. First, I had to deal with a more immediate threat, so I began to assess the level of danger possessed by the group of 9. 7 of them were witches. At least one of them was the first rank, and she used familiar magic. That might have been how they'd found me. A witch's familiar could be anything from a toad to an eagle. Sometimes it was a powerful creature of the dark, although they were hard to control, so the familiar might have been able to find me despite the cloak I'd wrapped around myself. I could also tell that one of the group climbing the hill was an ab-human, and the 9th was a man, a dark mage. It would be easy to make my escape by choosing the path of least resistance. 2 of the witches were young, hardly more than novices. I could simply break through the encircling line at that point and flee into the darkness, but that was not my way. I had to remind them who I was, send a clear message to who pursued me that I was Grimalkin, the witch assassin of the Malkin clan. I had run for so long they had grown disrespectful. I had to teach them fear again. So I called down the hill to my enemies. I am Grimalkin, and I could kill you all, I cried. But I will slay only 3. The strongest 3. There was no answer, but everything became very still and quiet. This was the calm. I was the storm. Now I draw two weapons. In my left hand, I grip the long blade that I use for hand-to-hand combat. In my right, a throwing dagger. My enemies are entering the trees now, so I descend to the hill, advancing to meet them. First, I will slay the mage. Next, the abhuman. Finally, the familiar witch, the strongest of all. I am walking slowly, taking care to make no noise. Some of my enemies lack the skill to do likewise or are careless. My hearing is acute, and I detect the occasional distant crack of a twig or the faint rustle of long skirts trailing through the undergrowth. Once in position above the mage, I come to a halt. He is only a man, and will be the easiest of the three to overcome, even though he is undoubtedly more powerful than 6 of the advancing witches. A witch assassin must never underestimate her opponent. I will kill him quickly, and then move on to the next. I coil myself like a sharp metal spring and concentrate on the attack, searching for the maid, probing the darkness with my keen eyes. He is a young man, though physically he is out of condition and overweight, breathing heavily from the climb. I whirl into motion. 3 rapid steps downhill, and I hurl the throwing blade without breaking my stride. It takes the mage in the heart, and he falls backwards, dead before he can even cry out. His magical defenses proved inadequate. The abhuman is my next target. He is big, with wide set eyes and sharp yellow fangs jutting up over his top lip. Such creatures of the children and the fiend, creatures of the fiend and a witch, are immensely strong and needed to be kept at a distance and tackled at an arm's length. To fall into their grasp is to risk being torn limb from limb. They are invariably brutal and morally debased, the worst of them capable of anything. If my child had been such an evil creature, I would have drowned it at birth. I sprint towards him at full pelt, plucking another throwing knife from its leather sheath. My throw is accurate and would have taken him in the throat, but he had been protected. The witches have infused him with their power, creating wards that deflect my blade. It skitters and scutters away uselessly, and he surges towards me, roaring in fury, wielding a large club in one hand and a barbed spear in the other. He swings the club and jabs with the spear, but I have moved before either reaches me. The heavy sack bounces against my back as I change direction again. Then, with my long blade, I cut the abhuman's throat, and he falls, choking, a stream of blood spraying upwards. Still without checking my stride, I run on. Now I must deal with the third enemy, the familiar witch. I am running windowshins against the clock, so my left and more deadly arm is facing towards the slope and the remaining witches, who are still moving upwards in my direction. A witch attacks, but not the one I seek. I ram the hilt of my blade into her face, and she falls back. She will live, but not without her front teeth. By now, the powerful familiar witch has sensed my attack, and she turns to face me, sending dark enchantments like poisoned spears towards my heart. I flick them aside and head directly towards her. I hear the beating of wings, and something swoops towards my face with claws outstretched. It is a small hawk, a kestrel. I sweep my blade upwards in an arc, and the hawk screams, its feathers falling upon me like blood-flecked snow. The witch shrieks as her familiar dies. She shrieks again when I cut her the first time. My next blow ends her life, and the only sounds now are the slip-slap of my feet on the ground and the whish-swish of my breath as I accelerate down the hill and leave the cover of the trees. I speed eastwards, out of the wood, leaving my enemies to find their dead. As I run, I go over in my mind what has happened. An assassin must evaluate both her successes and her failures. She must always learn from the past. I consider again by means with it which they have found me. The witch was powerful, but her familiar was just a small hawk. Their combined magic could not have seen beyond the cloak I had cast about myself. No, it has to be something else. What about this strange presence advancing with the larger group further back? What was it? Is that what has discovered me? If so, it must be powerful. It is never something I have encountered before, something new. It is wise to be wary of the unknown, but it's unfamiliarity that makes it dangerous. But soon it will be dead. How can I hope to defeat me? I am Grimalkin.